Hello! Okay, so this is the first video in a short series I'm going to do about basics for card making and other crafts. This one I'm just starting off a little bit to do with inks first. So I'll talk a bit about inks and then I'll be doing a project as well that you can see me doing. Now, I've not done this project, I haven't kind of pre-designed it or pre-made it. What I've done is I've picked up some projects and it's kind of to try and show you how easily you can create something without having to spend a lot of time preparing and cutting and measuring and things like that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is inks. Stampin' Up! Does dye-based ink. It also has a white pigment-based ink. There's Versamark, which is the sticky clear ink, and an archival ink, which is in the basic black, and you can get that in the grey colour too. Now, the difference between the different kind of inks, if you're a crafter, you might have heard the term pigment ink, dye ink, things like that. There is a difference in the type of ink, so just to really quickly explain that, if you have a pigment ink is like something crushed up. So actual pigments, actual pieces of powder, very fine powder. If you imagine like a powdered dye that's then mixed up into a solution and creates quite a thick ink in ink wise, it's quite thick, which means that, so when Stampin' Up! Do this Whisper White pigment, it's called pigment ink, you see it there, pigment ink, it's got that craft symbol at the top to remind us that it's not the normal dye ink like that one there. But if you open this up, it's a white ink pad, and the reason that they produce this one is because pigment ink will sit on the top of a piece of card. So instead of normally when you stamp, you would stamp down onto the card, and it's possible that your ink will slightly soak into the surface of the card. It does depend on the types of card that you're using, and I'll be talking about card types in another video as well. But for this video, I've just got two pieces of ink here, of card. A black piece of card and a white piece of card. It's just to show you the difference. So I've got just a stamp here that says huge congrats. It's out of the card kit that Stampin' Up! Do, one of the card kits. And I'm just going to ink up on the stamp here and stamp down onto this black card here. Give it a good press down, lift up, and as you can see, you can quite clearly see the white ink there. Now, if you'd have done that with a normal coloured ink and stamped on the black, you won't see it because the colour, when a dye ink, the colour, it's more like you're basically dyeing a liquid to become that colour. So the dye is not got the pieces of dye powder in it. It's just something that's been coloured. So if you imagine like when you're dyeing a jumper or something like that, you're dyeing the material with a coloured, that's kind of the same with dye ink. So it's a much thinner consistency and it then would sink into the black. You can get coloured pigment ink, Stampin' Up! Doesn't do it, but you can get coloured pigment inks of all different kinds of colour, and then you can stamp onto coloured cards and onto dark surfaces and it will show up. So that's what, when people say pigment and dye, that's what that basically is. And the Whisper White does come in really handy for some projects if you want a chalkboard effect or just for some different effects, which I'll try and do some projects with that another time. The archival ink here, it says archival basic black, is a black ink that I believe it is a sort of a dye-based ink. However, it sits on the top of the card quite well, so it still stays very very kind of intense, the colour. I used to use a Memento ink a lot, Memento black ink for stamping, and you can also get an ink called Stays-On, which is a solvent-based ink. That's another different type. Solvent-based ink won't come off with water, so it's kind of good for stamping and then being able to like colour with a brush and paint and things, or ink over the top. It won't wash away because it's not water soluble. It's made up with a sort of an alcohol type solution. But these black ink pads, they are a dye one, but once they dry, they are fixed. So with the archival, it doesn't fade, and you can stamp with it, knowing that when it's dried, you can go over the top with markers or ink or brushes or whatever, and it won't bleed. So if I just show you that one, this is using a felt. The base of this is a felt pad. That's just because of the type of ink it is. It obviously works better for for stamping up on the felt ink pad, so it's quite a hard surface on the ink pad, and then when you stamp down, pull up, it gives you a nice black impression there, and also the edges are nice and sharp. If you stamp that with Memento, I've noticed, in fact I've got an old Memento ink pad here, so what I'm going to do, I will just stamp this now with Memento ink. And theirs is also a felt pad, so quite a dense, kind of hard pad here, and just stamp that, see if you can see the difference. If we just give it a moment, you can sometimes notice the edge of the letters, they're just not quite as sharp, and in some cases, depending on the card that you use, even like these little dots along here, they could end up kind of blurring and they don't give you very sharp edges, and it's because the ink seems to soak into the cardstock more. So the archival black ink is a really good ink for doing projects that you're going to be using other colours and washes over the top. Just make sure it is properly dry. If you want to stamp and you want to use something I've got an aqua painter here, something with water, you'll notice there, it's coloured a bit pink so I was using it earlier, but you'll notice Memento also stays and the archival stays, so even though they've only just been stamped, they're pretty much, the Memento's just bleeding a little bit down here with the water, the archival one isn't. So it's not a solvent based ink like it stays on, but it is good enough to be able to watercolour over and things like that. So that's when you're stamping out your outlines of stamps, a good idea if you wanted to blacken and colour them in is to use the archival basic black. Other inks that you can get are the Versamark ink, so it's a clear, the pad's white, it's a foam sort of pad, it's a very sticky clear ink, so it's not a glue, so when it dries it will dry and it's not sticky anymore, but it's just a sticky clear ink, and really that's used for a couple of different techniques. It's used for what they call a resist technique, and it's used for embossing with embossing powder. So you would stamp with your Versamark ink and then you cover that with embossing powder. There's clear, there's copper, gold, silver, white, various other colours that you can get, and then you melt it using a heat tool, and it's amazing. I think embossing was the reason I started crafting in the first place, because I was watching TV, seeing them do this embossing, and even now I still love watching it. So that's embossing, so that's what Versamark is used for. And then these are the regular, and I've got a new one here, a Watermelon Wonder, because I'm just going to show you what it's like when you open it. They come wrapped like this. These are their coloured inks, they're all the colours that match all the range of their cardstock and papers and everything else. We've got Watermelon Wonder, and just to show you, they have on the bottom they have some little labels. They have them in the different languages, as Stampin' Up! Is multiple languages, and you can peel them off on the bottom and then just take the one that you want, so the Watermelon Wonder top part here, and stick it across the base of the pad. So I try and do that with all the new inks, just get time to do them all, and then you can see, so once you've got them stacked you can see from the side what colour you've got, which is handy. They do sit fairly nicely on top of each other. They will sit, but they don't exactly sort of stack in. So if you've got like the colour caddy or a shelf type system, it's good to be able to just see what you're using. They're also stored, the ink pad itself is actually upside down within the container that you flip over, but the handle is, the lid is attached so it doesn't come off. That means you're not going to start having to lose your lid and looking around on your desk for it, as most crafters I know, and certainly myself, are pretty messy, and so that is a handy thing. You can also, the refills that you get the little bottles of refill ink, so that you could just refill these, you don't have to keep rebuying the ink pads themselves. So it makes them quite environmentally friendly, I suppose, like that you don't have to keep rebuying them. It's a foam based pad, so it's quite squishy, so in contrast to the archival ink where it's a firm felt pad, these are quite squishy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my stamp off that I used earlier, and I'll just show you. So if I click this into place, it then sturdy, it's not going to wobble anywhere, it's clicked down. If you push this down too hard into the ink pad, you're just going to end up with ink all over your block here. And if you're not sure how these stamps and the blocks work and everything, I'll be doing that in another video. But if you push down, you're going to get ink on the block. So the blocks can be cleaned, it's not a problem at all. But if you push down too much and then you stamp and you push it down too hard, you're likely to blur or mess up your image. So it's quite good to sort of just tap, do light taps like this that you can do. And then you just simply press and lift. Now the ink will go into the cardstock slightly because it is dye ink, and that means that it'll stamp slightly darker than how it's going to actually look. So it will lighten up as it dries. But they're all these inks are coordinated with the cardstock that you get as well. So if you also squish the lid, so say I want to do a bit of watercolouring, I can squish the lid and transfer some of the ink into the lid here. And you can use, you can use a regular paintbrush. I've got these kind of old, what are they? Royal Crafters paintbrushes. I've got an old set of those. You can use those with some water, or you can use these water brushes here, which are really good. And you can simply pick up the ink from inside, and it allows you to watercolour with them. Obviously that's great for a whole different kind of set of designs, a whole different style of card, but you can see the possibilities of using the ink. And the refills that refill these also refill the markers. So you have the markers, this one, a Bermuda Bay marker here, with a nice fine end and also the thick brush end. And you can actually pull out the nibs of these markers and refill them with the same ink that you refill the ink pads in. The markers are slightly cheaper than ink pads if you want to, I think I said in my last video, if you want to get a full selection of colours quickly, you can get the markers in the sets. One thing you can also do as well is you can use your clear acrylic blocks or a cheap DIY tile for like a home base or B&Q or something. You can scribble there onto the block, and that would just give you a surface, a bit like in the lid of the ink pad there, that will give you a surface to pick up that ink and colour. The other alternative is to use your brush after you've used the pen on a card to pick up that ink and blur it a bit. And again, it kind of comes down to what kind of card you're using, cardstock you're using, and my video about card will go into that. It just allows different card will pick up the water in different ways, and things like watercolour card is more specialist for that kind of technique. So that's just a bit about inks there and about some of the different types, because it can be a bit confusing when you first start crafting and you're not really sure of how everything works. And then what I've got here is okay, hi. So so the first part of the video was me explaining about different kinds of inks, and I started to explain about a card and my video ran out of memory. So first job tomorrow is this evening, to order myself a memory card for it. In the meantime, I have kind of mostly made the card, but I'm just going to show you about putting it together. What I've done is I've got Balloon Adventures, so it was a new stamp set from the Occasions catalogue. It's got a plain balloon, a stripy, a spotty one, some sentiments, a couple of banners, the kind of balloon strings. And to be honest, it didn't really strike me as being anything particularly special, but it comes in a bundle, or you can buy a bundle which have the die cut pieces here. And when I actually saw it in the catalogue, even then I still didn't particularly like it because I didn't really like the colours it was done in. But as always, if you Pinterest anything, Google it or whatever, loads of inspiration comes your way. There's loads of demonstrators out there that do fantastic projects. So I've made a fairly quick and easy project with it. It's nothing really complicated, but hopefully you'll like it. I think it's quite effective. So what I did, I picked out two colours that I like together, which is Watermelon Wonder, Mint Macaron, these two colours of card. I stamped the sentiment, one of the sentiments in the set here, just onto some Mint Macaron. I was looking around for something to kind of embellish the front of the card a little bit with. And I found this paper, which is one of the, I believe it's one of the free celebration items. It's the Carried Away or the Up and Away paper set. And it's got Mint Macaron and Watermelon Wonder in the colours. But I quite like this dark background as well. It's a bit different. That I normally would use quite light, colourful colours, maybe a little bit brighter, but I quite like the navy. And the lady who I'm making this card for, a lady at work, she's not particularly a girly girl anyway. Not into maybe like pinks and things like that. So I just thought, yeah, perfect, let's get a card made with this. So I've cut a piece of A4 cardstock in half and then in half again. So I scored it in half to give me an A6 card. So all I've done is trimmed it down. It's 14.8 is your halfway measurement on your A4, and then if you score it at 10.5 you get a tiny little lip of about 1 millimetre, and you want to put the slightly longer side as your front side, but that gives you a way of opening the card very easily. If they're exactly matching, it can be sometimes difficult to actually open the card. So that's perfect. I cut a very vanilla piece of cardstock, again in half, but then I trimmed it right down to about 12 centimetres this way. And what I did, I just got the die here and matched that up, so that's kind of like the top and bottom of it here. You can do it on bigger pieces of card because there's no edging to here, it doesn't cut here or anything, so you can make your card as long or as tall as you want, but the score lines that it does, these are sort of score lines on the edge pieces here, will only score obviously between that width. So I cut the card down so it just fit around this window. I ran that through, and then what I did was I used the stamps. So I used these matching stamps here, stamped in the mint macaron on the 3 balloons, the stripy, the spotty and the kind of solid colour. And then the other dies that are in the set here, these two, I cut out of the gold foil cardstock, which is this part here. The gold foil sheets, I mean I've used, what you can see, a couple of inches squared there in the corner is what I actually used for this project. But these kind of enhancements just give the project so much extra, just a bit of extra kind of bling or an extra bit of jazz. So it's worth, even though sometimes some of the extra bits can seem a bit expensive, I would say just get yourself a few bits, even like something like this project, which I found an old one of mine here, which has got the Dazzling Diamonds butterfly punch shape out here. The glitter or the foil or the embellishments can just make that just a little extra difference. So all I've done is die cut that piece. I cut 2 panels of that patterned paper here, just to stick in here, and then I backed this piece as well with the same. And that's just going to get stuck down there. I put the 2 gold pieces on. I stamped the banner from the stamp set here. I actually stamped that separately on a piece of vanilla cardstock, and then stamped the happy birthday in it to make sure it was right, because sometimes you can be a bit messy sometimes when you're stamping, and sometimes you can stamp down, and if I'd have ruined that, I'd have ruined the whole piece that I'd just done. So I stamped it separately and actually just quickly cut it out and then placed it over the top, which just means you know it's going to be sort of bang on. And then all I'm going to do now is literally just stick it down, and I also just added a bit of gold ribbon in the middle. That is from the Celebration free ribbons, which here's the silver one as well that I had out. Absolutely gorgeous gold and silver ribbons, and they come free in the Celebration promotion as well, so that's really good. So all I've got to do now is basically stick glue down on these side panels, so only up to the crease line that goes along here. So I would stick, just get my liquid glue going, stick a very thick sort of thin beaded line, if you like, round the edge of those 2 squares. Just make sure you don't get a glue anywhere else on the back of the card. And then what I'm going to do is make sure that the middle crease, and putting it down sort of with the middle bit first, because I want to make sure that middle crease lines up before I put these bits down. And then once I've got those down, I'm just going to straighten it up. You do get a moment or two with liquid glue to move things around, but not very long, so I just want to make sure that really those bits are stuck in the right place. And then that will just fold down. Okay, so that's the tip for you straight away, just make sure the score lines are folded there. But then I'm just going to stick this front panel down as well. Actually I'm going to use dimensionals for this front piece, so I'm just going to take some of the hexagonal pieces and put them like that in the edges. You can use this quite sparingly, you don't need to go overboard. Some people sort of tend to put them through like all across the whole back of the cards, but obviously you're trying to keep, you don't want to be spending money on dimensionals all the time, so just keep them, unless it's going to get squashed, particularly squashed, you don't really need to be putting them all over the back, just something like that, like 5 would do there, and then that will just sit on there. Just going to make sure it's in the centre. And again, if I'd put that down on the first, that would have made that easier. But that just takes, you know, a couple of pieces of card, one stamp set with one matching die set, and then you've got your card there. And to be fair, I think that's actually a really pretty card, and just right for the lady that I'm making that for. So there you go, and I hope you like it. Thank you. Bye.